They thought she was just a woman in a wheelchair until Arnold walked in and shut the whole place down. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Under the dusty glow of Montana's fading sun, the Welcome Home Diner sat quietly at the edge of a town that had long since forgotten its heroes. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee and fried eggs clung to every surface, mixing with the faint scent of lemon polish and old vinyl booths. Linda Rose sat alone in the far left corner, the same booth she occupied every afternoon between shifts, a place where she could breathe between the ghosts of yesterday and the noise of now. She folded napkins with steady, practiced hands, their skin rough and scarred. At 48, Linda had learned to move like someone who didn't want to be noticed. Her posture was straight, disciplined, and when she shifted in her seat, her left pant leg moved just slightly differently than the right. Beneath the faded denim, a prosthetic leg adjusted with a faint metallic hiss. It wasn't just a missing limb that marked her. It was a weight in her eyes, something older than war, deeper than grief. The light from the window cut across her table an angle, painting golden lines across her tray of utensils and her folded hands. She adjusted her sleeve absently, revealing a worn tattoo on her forearm. The eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps. Time had faded the ink, but not the memory. Most people didn't notice. Those who did rarely asked. Linda had stopped telling her story years ago. Afghanistan had taken more than her leg. It had taken silence, sleep, the easy laugh she once had. She didn't need pity. She needed routine, shift at 3, coffee at 5, napkins folded in stacks of 20. It kept the noise away. It kept her sane. The diner itself was a relic. Cracked tile floors, walls that had absorbed more secrets than sound, and a bell above the door that chimed like an old memory every time someone walked in. Mike, the owner, had hired her with a handshake and no questions. He'd served in Vietnam. That was enough. No one asked why she didn't stand when they walked in. No one asked how she managed the breakfast rush on one leg and a smile that didn't always reach her eyes. The regulars nodded. That was all. Sometimes that's all a veteran needs. Outside, a storm was building. Not in the sky, but in the shape of 4 men crossing the parking lot with a swagger of people who thought the world owed them a favor. Linda saw them before the bell rang. She knew their type. She'd served with better men than them. She'd buried better men than them. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was a diner. And today was supposed to be quiet. She kept folding napkins. The men entered like they owned the air, voices raised, laughter forced. They reeked of beer and bravado. The leader wore his dishonor like a badge. Jack Winters. She remembered the name from base chatter years ago, an Army private who'd been kicked out for conduct that embarrassed even the worst of them. He didn't recognize her. That was fine. She wasn't here to be remembered. Linda kept her eyes on her work as Jack nudged one of his friends, motioning toward her. Well, if it isn't the half-soldier on wheels, he said, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. His buddies chuckled like hyenas without shame. She kept folding. 18 years of service had taught her how to choose her battles. This wasn't one. Not yet. Behind the counter, Melissa, the young waitress barely old enough to vote, stiffened. Her eyes darted to Linda, then away. She started wiping the already spotless counter, pretending not to hear. The cook in the back paused, then resumed the rhythm of his spatula on the grill. No one spoke. Jack kept going. Didn't know they let cripples serve food. That's got to be a health code thing, right? Linda wheeled herself to a nearby table, collected empty mugs. Her face didn't change. Her hands didn't shake. Can I get you gentlemen some menus? She asked, voice calm, even. Jack stretched across the booth like he owned it. Sure thing, Wheels. Roll it on over. She placed the menus on the table with deliberate care. Jack leaned in, his voice a loud whisper meant for the room. How'd a woman even get into Marines? Must have been some kind of quota. That's the only way someone like you ends up wearing uniform. Linda turned to leave. Jack's voice rose. Women like you are why the military's soft. Dead weight. That's what you are. Her grip on the wheelchair tightened, but she said nothing. He reached out, grabbed her wrist. So, you really were a jarhead? Let me guess. filing paperwork while real men fought. "Remove your hand," she said quietly. There was no anger, only steel. He shoved her back. "What are you going to do? Run me over?" She stared at him, then pivoted her chair. His boot shot out, blocked her wheel. "Did I dismiss you, Marine?" Linda navigated around him without a word. As she rolled away, he called after her, "Wheelchair warriors should stay home. You people can't stand on your own feet. Why should the rest of us have to trip over you?" This time, the laughter from his table echoed longer. The silence that followed from the rest of the diner was heavier than before. Linda returned to her corner booth, face expressionless, movements precise. But her hand drifted once to the left side of her chest, where her dress blues once held medals. She didn't touch them. She remembered them. Outside, the wind picked up. The bell above the door swayed slightly in its frame, as if waiting for something. Inside, Linda waited too, not for revenge, not for justice, but for the moment when silence would no longer mean surrender. The men took their seats like they were claiming territory. Jack slouched into the booth, spreading his legs wide, one arm draped over the backrest like a throne. His friends followed suit, cracking jokes too loudly, their laughter bouncing off the diner's worn walls. It wasn't the volume that quieted the room. It was the way Jack's eyes locked onto Linda, like she was prey he'd circled before. She returned to her station near the counter, organizing silverware that didn't need organizing. Her shoulders were squared, her breathing measured. Inhale for 4 counts. Hold. Exhale. Discipline. Precision. It had kept her alive in places most people couldn't imagine. Today, it would have to do the same. "Hey, soldier girl," Jack called out across the diner. "What's today's special? Charity?" More laughter, the kind that fills up space meant for kindness. Linda turned slowly, not because she was afraid, but because she had learned the danger of reacting too fast. Reacting gave them power. She rolled toward their table with the same grace she used to walk patrols through Kandahar, calculated, steady, unshaken. "Today's special is meatloaf," she said, placing their water glasses down, one by one. "Would you like to order?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "Meatloaf, huh? Guess that fits." He looked her up and down, a sneer curling at the edge of his mouth. Mushed up leftovers pretending to be something solid. One of his buddies choked on a laugh. The heavy-set man with a patchy beard raised his glass in a mock toast. "Here's the meatloaf." And the soldiers who didn't make the cut. Linda didn't flinch. She had faced worse. Mortar fire didn't come with punchlines, but it landed harder. She placed her notepad in her apron pocket and began to turn away. Jack wasn't finished. "Tell me something, Sergeant Roll-Along. Did they let you shoot real guns, or just a camera from morale posters?" His words were louder now, deliberate. The entire diner could hear. A few patrons shifted in their seats. Some looked away. Others froze in place, unsure if silence was safer than shame. Linda stopped mid-turn. Her back was to them. That was safer. That was smarter. She wheeled away without a word. Not even a salute? Jack shouted after her. "Come on, give us the full show. Or can you only stand when someone lifts you up?" More laughter. This time, it grated like sandpaper on glass. Behind the counter, Melissa's hand hovered above the register. Her face was pale. She looked like she wanted to say something, but her eyes flicked to the back kitchen where Dave, the manager, stood watching. He gave a subtle shake of his head. "Not now. Not worth it." Linda reached the edge of the counter and steadied herself. Her hand brushed the Marine Corps pin on her apron, not for comfort, for clarity. She'd survived chaos overseas. She would survive cowards at home. But then came the moment she hadn't predicted. The heavy-set man rose, wobbled slightly, then walked toward her from behind. She didn't see him coming. His boots were too quiet, his intent too loud. "We're talking to you, soldier girl," he slurred. Before Linda could react, he grabbed the handles of her wheelchair and shoved it forward. The world tilted. Her front wheels clipped the edge of a table. Her body launched out. A jolt of helpless weightlessness before the hard, cold floor met her side. Her prosthetic leg twisted beneath her, painfully pinned. Coffee from a nearby table splashed across her clothes. Her hands slammed against the tile. Her breath hitched. And then silence. The entire diner froze. Forks paused midair. Chairs stopped mid-rock. No one moved. No one helped. Only Jack's laughter continued, sharp and unrelenting. It pierced the air like shrapnel. Linda lay still for a second longer than she needed to. Not because she couldn't move, but because everything had returned. Dust, heat, explosions, voices she hadn't heard in years. The smell of coffee mixed with blood in her mind. She blinked hard. Then she moved, with the same strength that had dragged wounded comrades from burning vehicles. Linda pushed herself up. Her arms, long trained for a world that no longer offered balance, did what her legs once did. She righted her chair, slow but sure, ignoring the stinging heat from the spilled coffee now soaking through her jeans. Nobody helped. A few patrons looked down at their plates. One man muttered something about minding his business. A woman near the window shook her head, whispering. Someone should say something, as if saying it absolved her from doing it. Linda gathered her belongings with mechanical precision. Wallet, napkins, a photograph that had fallen face down. She picked it up last. The image was worn, creased from years in her pocket. Her in uniform, smiling, standing with her unit before Afghanistan had changed everything, before pain became routine. She sat back in her wheelchair, adjusted her leg, then returned to her corner like nothing had happened. But something had. The boy at table 6 tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, "is that lady a soldier too?" His father didn't answer at first. His eyes were on Linda, on the quiet dignity, on the pin on her apron. "Yes," he said at last, his voice low, firm. "From the looks of it, a real one." He stood, pulled out his phone, and walked out of the diner. Inside, Jack laughed again. Outside, something shifted. The coffee burned through her clothes. But Linda didn't wince. Pain was a familiar visitor. It came without warning, stayed longer than welcome, and left quietly. She sat still in her wheelchair, her spine straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her clothes clung to her skin, damp and stained, but her face remained unreadable. Across the diner, Jack and his friends continued to laugh, their voices sharp and careless, as if they hadn't just knocked a war veteran to the floor, as if none of it mattered. No one had helped her up, not the manager, not the staff, not a single customer. A few had looked away, pretending not to see. Others stared down into their coffee cups like they held the answers to questions no one dared ask. A couple whispered each other, their discomfort loud in its silence. And Dave, the man who signed her paycheck, stayed behind the counter, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. The napkins were ruined, the tray bent slightly at the corner. But Linda focused on the photograph now resting in her palm. Her unit, frozen in time. All standing, some smiling, some solemn. She had kept that photo through sandstorms, mortar blasts, and the long, cold recovery that followed. Now it had landed in grease and dust because a stranger thought her worth was defined by a chair. She carefully tucked it back into her wallet. Melissa, the young waitress, started forward with a towel in hand. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a tight line. She took a single step before Dave grabbed her elbow. "Don't," he muttered under his breath. "They're paying customers. We don't need a scene." Melissa stared at him like she hadn't heard right. "But she works here. Part-time," Dave snapped. "Just take their drink orders and keep it moving." Linda heard it all. She said nothing. She always heard more than people thought. She wheeled herself back to her booth, one hand lightly brushing the Marine Corps pin on her collar. She didn't reach for another cup of coffee. She didn't clean the table. She simply sat. Her shoulders held tension, but her expression didn't crack. At table 6, the boy named Tommy still watched her, eyes wide and unblinking. His father hadn't returned yet. His mother whispered something to him, but he didn't stop staring. Linda didn't notice. Not at first. But when she finally did look up, their eyes met. He didn't look away. In that moment, something passed between them. Not pity, not fear, recognition. At Jack's table, the laughter had faded. One of the men fiddled with his glass, his fingers tapping a nervous rhythm. Another shifted in his seat, glancing around as if realizing for the first time that maybe they'd crossed a line. Jack, however, leaned back with smug satisfaction, stretching like a man who thought he'd won something. His voice cut through the quiet. "Hey, half-soldier, my coffee's getting cold. Don't they teach you how to serve in the Marines?" Linda didn't move. She didn't respond. But the bell above the door jangled as it opened. And this time, it wasn't a customer. The black SUV outside had rolled up silently, but now it idled just beyond the window. It was long, sleek, and unmistakably official. The kind of vehicle used by people with power. Not just political power. Personal power. The kind that entered a room before a man said a word. The door swung wide. A hush fell over the diner. So complete, even the kitchen stopped. Boots stepped inside, polished, heavy. The figure that followed needed no introduction. Not in this country. Not in this state. He had once governed it. He had once inspired millions with nothing but grit, steel, and a name that needed no echo. Arnold Schwarzenegger. He wore a dark suit, simple but sharp, his eyes hidden behind tinted glasses. The room, once filled with ridicule, now held its breath. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He walked past the tables like a man walking through memory. He stopped in front of Linda's booth. She looked up confused, then surprised. Then, still, Arnold removed his glasses. His face was unreadable, but his eyes locked on hers like he saw everything that had happened without needing to ask. He raised his hand and saluted, sharp, precise, full military form. A breath caught in Linda's throat. She hesitated, then returned the salute. The room didn't applaud, but something shifted. A weight lifted. The air, once thick with shame, began to clear. Arnold spoke quietly, but every word carried. "No one pushes a veteran down," he said, "and walks away like it didn't happen." Linda's eyes stung, but she didn't blink. She didn't need to. For the first time since Afghanistan, she didn't feel alone. Arnold didn't sit. Not right away. He stood beside Linda's table like a sentinel, his hands slowly lowering from the salute. The silence inside the diner was more than just quiet. It was loaded, pressurized. No one dared move, not even Jack, whose earlier arrogance now cracked beneath the weight of the moment. Arnold's gaze swept the room once, slow and deliberate, not in anger, but in judgment. The kind of judgment that didn't need to raise its voice to be felt. The kind that made men reconsider who they thought they were. He spoke again. His voice was low, deep, shaped by years of command and compassion. "I didn't come here as a movie star," he said. "I didn't come here as a governor." He paused, letting that settle. "I came here because someone who served this country with honor was knocked to the ground." And everyone watched. Linda looked down at her lap, fingers folded tightly, her prosthetic legs still damp from spilled coffee. She hadn't asked for any of this, but her presence demanded it now. Arnold turned to Dave, the manager, who stood frozen behind the counter, face pale. "You hired her, didn't you?" Dave swallowed hard. "Yes, part-time." "She served full-time," Arnold said flatly. "And she carries more discipline in one hand than some men carry in a lifetime." A few patrons shifted in their booths. A fork clinked against a plate. No one spoke. He looked toward the booth where Jack and his friend sat. Jack tried to straighten his posture, but his smirk was gone. The heavy-set man stared at the table. One of the others reached for his glass with a hand that trembled just enough to be noticed. Arnold didn't approach them. He didn't need to. His presence did the work. "This woman," he said, gesturing to Linda without looking away from them, wore the uniform when it meant sleeping in sand, not air conditioning. She bled for people she didn't know. She pulled children from fire. She trained soldiers who came home because of her decisions. And today, he gestured at the floor where the coffee stain remained, dark against the linoleum. This is how she was treated. Linda's jaw clenched, her eyes glistening but not soft. She didn't want pity. She never had. But truth, finally spoken, landed like a weight removed from her chest. Arnold looked back at her. "You don't have to speak," he said. "That's the thing about real strength. It speaks for itself. He finally took a seat across from her, folded his hands on the table like he'd done this 1,000 times. Because he had. With soldiers, with survivors, with people who carried silent wars inside them. Melissa, the young waitress, approached hesitantly. Her apron was still crumpled from where Dave had grabbed her earlier. She glanced at Linda, then Arnold, unsure of protocol. "Can I clean the table for you?" Arnold nodded once. "For coffees," he added. "Black." She blinked. "For." The door opened again. This time, not with ceremony. Just purpose. 3 more figures stepped inside. 2 men, 1 woman. Dressed clean, neat, nothing flashy, but unmistakable. Veterans carried themselves differently. Shoulders square. Eyes scanning. Feet placed like every step mattered. The woman wore a navy blazer. The younger man held a folded wheelchair. The third, taller, older, walked with slight limp and a cane that clicked sharply against the floor. They didn't speak. They didn't smile. They walked to Linda's table and stopped. Arnold stood again. He nodded toward them, then stepped aside. The older man brought his heels together, squared his shoulders, and delivered a textbook salute. "Staff Sergeant Rowe," he said, voice clear. "Forgive our delayed response, ma'am." Linda blinked. For a moment, the weight of the years, the IED, the hospital, the prosthetic, the silence, washed over her all at once. She returned the salute with slow, perfect form. No hesitation. No apology. "At ease, Master Sergeant," she replied. The younger man smiled. "Corporal Jenkins, ma'am. You pulled me out when our convoy got hit. Kandahar, 2012. Her eyes widened. "You were barely 20. Still green," he nodded. "But I never forgot." The female veteran placed her hand gently on Linda's shoulder. No one forgot. All across the diner, something began to happen. An older man near the window stood slowly, removed his hat to reveal silver hair and a Korean War pin. A woman with an Air Force insignia on her jacket rose from a corner booth. 3 men near the back, all in civilian clothes, straightened as if on instinct. One of them called out softly, "Attention." More stood, more followed. Veterans, civilians, people who had never served, but who now saw something they hadn't before. Respect. It didn't matter how many legs Linda had. She had stood when no one else would. And now, the entire room stood for her. Jack didn't move. His friends didn't either. Their booth, once a fortress of noise and mockery, now felt like a trap. The laughter had died, swallowed by the quiet unity rising around them. Eyes from every corner of the diner turned toward them, not with anger, but with something colder. Disappointment. Judgment. The kind that stays with a man longer than any insult ever could. The man who had shoved Linda into the floor stared down at his hands, now motionless beside his untouched drink. He looked smaller somehow, less sure of himself, less sure what kind of man he really was. Jack tried to muster his usual smirk, but the weight in the room made it feel like a mask that no longer fit. He grabbed a few bills from his wallet, tossed them on the table without counting, and stood up. His buddies followed. No one told them to leave. No one had to. As they passed Linda's table, none of them met her eyes. Corporal Jenkins didn't look up from his coffee. But just as the last one stepped past the booth, he spoke, low, calm, and unmistakable. "Semper Fi, gentlemen." The words landed like a slap. Not loud, but final. They didn't respond. They walked out, heads slightly bowed, the bell above the door marking their exit like a closing chapter. Inside, the diner began to breathe again. Arnold looked over at Dave. The manager, who hadn't moved from his post behind the counter, straightened his tie awkwardly. "Your meals are on the house today," he said, trying to reclaim control, to insert himself into a moment that already passed him by. Master Sergeant Wilson shook his head. "Marines pay our debts. Always have, always will." Dave nodded quickly, stepping back without another word. Melissa brought fresh coffee to the table. Her hands were steadier now. She placed each cup with care, pausing only once to glance at Linda. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked softly. Linda shook her head. This is enough. They drank in silence for a few minutes. The kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. The kind that had been earned. Linda sat straighter than she had in months. Not out of pride, not even out of defiance, but because for the first time in a long time, she felt seen, not stared at, not judged, seen. From time to time, a patron would approach quietly. A nod, a soft thank you, a hand placed gently on her shoulder before walking away. No long speeches, no tears, just respect, offered in small doses, the kind that mattered most. At one point, a man wearing a Desert Storm cap stopped by. He didn't say a word, just placed a single silver challenge coin on the table, tapped it once with his finger, and walked away. Linda looked down at it, her thumb brushing the engraving. She didn't need to read it to know what it meant. Legacy. Arnold didn't speak much after that. He didn't need to. His presence said everything. He leaned back in his seat, sipping coffee like he had nowhere else more important to be. Eventually, he checked his watch. I have to head back to Sacramento, he said, standing. Linda nodded. Thank you for coming. He gave a small smile. I didn't come for the coffee. He reached into his inner pocket, pulled out a folded note, and placed it in front of her. You don't have to read it now. Just when the silence feels heavy again. She took it, tucking it into her wallet next to the photo of her unit. Arnold looked around the diner once more. They're still good in places like this. You just have to remind them sometimes. Then he turned and walked out, no fanfare, no word of farewell. Only the bell above the door, chiming once more. From that day on, things changed. The booth where Jack and his friends had sat remained empty, not because anyone told people to avoid it, but because no one wanted to sit where disrespect had once lived. Instead, regulars began drifting closer to Linda's corner, not to intrude, but to witness, to acknowledge, to honor. She returned to her routines, folding napkins, serving coffee. But now she wore her Marine Corps pin in full view, and her wheelchair bore a small flag, not loud, not flashy, just there, like her, strong, present, unapologetically seen. The old stain from the coffee spill had been scrubbed clean, but something about the light caught the floor differently in that spot, as if the memory had etched itself into the tile, refusing to be washed away. And no one tried to, because that moment, like her service, deserved to be remembered. Thursday afternoons became something of a ritual. At precisely 1 p.m., a Desert 10 SUV would roll into the diner's parking lot, parking neatly in the corner spot closest to the entrance. It never honked, never rushed. It just arrived, predictable, like the sun settling into its place in the sky. Linda always knew when it came, not by sound, but by the way the room shifted, the quiet anticipation, the way Melissa would straighten her apron, or the way Dave would smooth his shirt collar. Arnold never made a show of walking in. He never had to. He pushed the door open with the same deliberate ease he used that first day, nodding at familiar faces, making eye contact with those who dared meet his gaze. And then he would walk to Linda's booth and sit. They didn't speak much at first, just sipped coffee and watched the diner carry on. Sometimes Corporal Jenkins joined them, sometimes Master Sergeant Wilson. Sometimes they came alone. It didn't matter. What mattered was that they came. Every week. And every week, the same thing happened. Someone new would stop by. A stranger with nervous eyes and a pressed uniform. A young woman preparing to ship out. A reservist returning from his first tour. A man in plain clothes who carried the invisible weight of too many memories. They didn't always introduce themselves. Sometimes they just stood near the table, unsure of how to start. But Linda always made it easy. Coffee's decent, she'd say, and the company's better. One Thursday, a young woman in a freshly ironed Army combat uniform stood just inside the doorway, clutching a small backpack like it held more than just clothes. She was barely 20. Her boots were too clean, her eyes too wide. She looked around, unsure, then spotted Linda and froze. Linda wheeled over, her motion smooth and effortless. First deployment? She asked gently. The girl nodded. Tomorrow morning, she whispered. Linda smiled softly, then gestured to the empty chair at her table. Sit. Take a breath. The girl hesitated. I wouldn't want to intrude. You're not intruding, Linda replied. You're continuing a tradition. And so the girl sat, and slowly her shoulders relaxed. That's how it began. Linda didn't see herself as a mentor. She didn't lecture. She didn't recite doctrine. She just told stories. Little ones. About nights in the desert when the wind howled so loud it felt like the sky was screaming. About soldiers who found laughter in the middle of fear. About the difference between orders and instincts. And about how strength wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, like getting back up after falling, like staying when it would be easier to leave. One Saturday morning, Tommy came in with a folded piece of construction paper. Crayon drawings covered every inch of it. Figures in uniform, big smiles, a wheelchair with a flag attached to the back. He handed it to Linda without a word. She opened it carefully, her fingers pausing on the crooked stick figure that wore a tiny pin on her collar. Is this supposed to be me? She asked, eyebrows raised. Tommy nodded seriously. Dad says you're a hero. Linda looked at the boy's father. Lieutenant Crawford stood at the counter, watching from a distance, a small smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. He also says heroes should smile more. Linda chuckled, quiet but real, the kind of laugh that had been missing for a long time. Your dad's a smart man. Tommy shrugged. He says what you do matters more than what you say. Linda nodded, folding the drawing and tucking it into her jacket pocket. He's not wrong. The diner began to change, slowly but undeniably. A new plaque appeared above Linda's corner booth. Simple brass. It read, reserved for those who stand when others fall. On the far wall, photographs of local veterans began to fill the empty space. Not big, not flashy, just names, faces, and years of service. Melissa started asking questions about rank structure. She learned how to tell the difference between an officer and an NCO. She learned which stories to ask about and which to leave alone. Dave replaced the uniforms of his staff with pressed collar shirts. He added a flag pin to his lapel. He greeted every veteran personally now, whether he recognized them or not. A few weeks later, Linda was invited to speak at the local high school. She stood in the auditorium, nerves buzzing beneath her skin, and looked out at rows of young faces who hadn't lived through war but would inherit its consequences. She didn't speak about combat or loss. She spoke about discipline, about purpose, about how silence doesn't mean weakness, and how you don't have to raise your voice to be strong. The uniform doesn't make you a Marine, she told them. It's standing tall when it would be easier to crumble. It's carrying weight for someone who can't carry it alone. And they listened, not because she demanded it, but because she earned it. 6 months after the coffee spilled and the silence broke, the Welcome Home diner didn't look all that different on the outside. The same chipped white paint on the siding, the same weather-beaten sign above the entrance. But something inside had shifted. It was subtle, quiet, like the way a room feels warmer, without anyone touching the thermostat. Linda still came in early, still folded napkins with precision, still clocked in for her shifts without fanfare. But now, the Marine Corps pin on her collar wasn't tucked beneath her apron. Now, the flag on the back of her wheelchair was always upright, and the booth where she once sat alone between rushes was never quite empty anymore. The plaque above her table gleamed under the morning light. The brass had been polished so many times it seemed to glow. Below it, the words were simple. Every soldier has a place here. Most days, no one said anything about it, but everyone noticed. On Thursdays, the tan SUV still arrived, on time, without a sound. Arnold stepped out with the same slow, steady gait, as if the world would wait until he was ready. He never stayed long. Sometimes just long enough for a coffee. Sometimes long enough for a quiet chat. But every visit left behind a feeling that lingered even after he'd gone, a presence that didn't fade. He brought others with him once. 2 retired officers. One wore a leg brace. The other carried a framed photo of his daughter, who never made it home. They sat with Linda for hours, telling stories only people who had served could understand. They laughed at things civilians might never find funny, cried at things they didn't try to explain. And then they stood, shook her hand, and left lighter somehow. Arnold didn't bring gifts, didn't give speeches, but he left something behind that couldn't be wrapped, something permanent. One day, he arrived holding an envelope. Inside was a simple design for a new sign to hang above the diner door. It showed a table and 4 empty chairs, silhouetted beneath an American flag. At the bottom, the veterans' table. He didn't ask permission. He just nodded at Dave, who cleared his throat and said, "Well, get it done." And they did. A month later, the old sign came down. The new one went up. No ribbon cutting. No cameras. Just a group of veterans standing outside with their hands over their hearts as the sun dipped low behind the mountains. Inside, Melissa brought out coffee like always. Her movements confident now. She recognized the ribbons on uniforms, knew how to greet each branch by name. She wore a small pin on her apron now. It said, "I listen." The booth where Jack and his friends once sat remained empty, not out of fear, but respect. No one wanted to sit where dishonor had once laughed. Instead, it became a quiet marker. A space people passed without needing to ask what had happened there. They already knew. Linda spoke more now, but only when she wanted to. She still had her silence, still kept her dignity wrapped around her like armor, but she used her voice when it mattered. A new recruit who didn't think she was strong enough. A widow who lost her son and came in looking for a story of survival. A teenage boy who wanted to join the Marines but didn't know where to start. She helped all of them. Not with advice, with presence. On her days off, she visited the local high school again. This time, she didn't need a microphone. The students leaned in. They wrote down what she said, not because she asked them to, because they wanted to remember. She told them the truth, that some battles never make the news, that dignity is quiet, that courage is getting up when no one claps, and that strength isn't measured in medals, but in how you treat someone when no one's watching. Arnold sent a letter near the end of summer. Handwritten. No signature needed. It said, "You don't have to be loud to be powerful. Some people lead with words. Others lead with silence. But the ones who carry both, those are the ones who change the world." Linda kept it folded in her wallet, next to the photo of her unit, next to Tommy's drawing. Every Thursday, she arrived at the diner 5 minutes early, rolled quietly to her booth, and waited. Sometimes the SUV came, sometimes it didn't, but the chair across from her was always ready, and the town noticed. Veterans who had once hidden their pasts now wore their pins. Business owners put signs in their windows, discounts to those who served. Local churches started holding monthly veteran brunches, and in the park downtown, a new bench was installed under the biggest oak tree. It had a small plaque, too. It read, "No one stands alone." One evening, as the last light disappeared beyond the mountains, Linda wheeled herself out of the diner, jacket collar flipped up against the wind. Melissa waved from inside. Dave stood at the door, watching her go. She moved slowly but purposefully toward the parking lot. The tan SUV was already there, waiting, not for a hero, but for someone who never asked to be one. Linda paused, turned back for just a moment, and looked at the glowing windows of the diner behind her. Laughter floated out through cracks. Warmth radiated from the people inside. And in that moment, she understood, the greatest victories don't happen on battlefields. They happen in places like this. One person at a time. One act of dignity. One table that never gets forgotten.